Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife
Hello.
Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and today we're looking at the big brother to Distilled, the new game Luthier by Paverson Games and Dave Beck and Abe Burson. So let's get into it.
So in Luthier, we are artisan musical instrument makers. And so we're going to try and have the most prestige, be the most prestigious maker by making sure that we get the right materials, create the absolute best instruments. Along the way, like any artist, we're gonna need patrons to support us in this process. And they can be a little bit tricky. So we need to keep them happy, giving them either the types of instruments that they like, or even contributing to performances in the orchestra of the type of music that they like. We're also going to be able to repair instruments and find other ways or other objectives to increase our prestige throughout the game. Whoever has the most prestige by the end of the game will be the winner.
Now, core to this game is worker placement, and this worker placement plays out with blind bidding, which I'll explain in a moment. But what are you trying to achieve in this game? Well, there's a little bit of area control here in the orchestra, and there's a healthy dose of resource management as well, because you're going to be bringing the 3 different types of resources onto your player board, which represents your workbench. And what are you trying to do here? Well, you're trying to craft these beautiful instruments. These instruments start on one side of your board where you're going to create them to begin with, and then they're going to move to the other side of your board where you're going to polish them and give them those finishing touches before you deliver them to the sponsor who has asked you to craft this item. Now, at the heart of this game is worker placement, and this is a blind bidding style of worker placement. So at the start of the game, you're going to have 3 workers, each of different skill levels. So 5 being the strongest and 1 being the weakest. And what everyone is going to do in turn order is they are going to place one of these workers face down in an area of their board or on their own workbench. Once all the players have placed all of the workers in turn order, we're going to be selecting the area of the board that we want to activate, and all of the workers are going to be revealed, and then in skill order, we are going to allow all the players to play out their turns in that area. So you want to have a strong or skilled worker in that area to ensure that you're able to go first. Now, what are you trying to get done in this game? Well, you are really trying to keep sponsors happy for the most part. Sponsors are these patron cards that are going to help support your craft by asking you to craft particular instruments, or to perform for them, or to repair certain types of instruments. And so that's what you're going to be trying to get done to earn a lot of victory points, as well as ongoing benefits throughout the game and end game scoring points. So once you have a sponsor, you're able to bring them here onto your player board, and then they are going to have different demands, and then you're going to go out to other parts of the board in order to fulfill those demands. So for example, you can go to the guild to collect new instruments, and you're going to have the right resources in order to craft those instruments. You can go and make a performance, and there's going to be different performance cards that have different requirements that you need to meet, and depending on your risk orientation, you have the opportunity to roll dice, potentially mitigate those rolls, and to perform different types of music. And the other thing you can do to satisfy sponsors is to go and repair instruments. So again, we're going to have a market of items that need repairing, different types of instruments, and they are also going to require the right resources in order to construct those, get some victory points, and then also contribute to the sponsors' demands. Now, it's not just about the sponsors, because every time you finish crafting one of these instruments, you're going to get to place one of these instrument tokens out onto this area majority part of the board, otherwise known as the orchestra. Whenever you perform or repair, you're also going to be able to place tokens out, although they're not as powerful in the majority game as these different instruments. At the end of the game, we're going to get bonus points for having the majority of chairs. So that is the dominant place on each of these positions. And along the way, they're also going to give you benefits by way of different resources and also the currency in this game. How do you get resources? Well, you can get them all over the place at different spots, but there's also a market where you can forego your worker placement action in order to take a market action to buy and sell different resources. There's a lot of other things going on in this game, which we won't get into, but for this part of the video, I'll just also explain there are 3 different tracks here that you're going to be moving your shield up in order to unlock new benefits or bonuses that are going to help you out throughout the game. And the final thing I'll talk about in this game is the balcony. If you go to the balcony, you're going to be able to manipulate turn order, which is particularly important in this game, which we'll talk about later. But also it allows you to remove one of the trophies on your board that unlocks something cool, but you get to put it on one of these public objectives and take that spot. The game continues for 6 rounds, and at the end of the game, it will be the person who has the most victory points either collected along the way or based on the end game conditions. Now, let's get into how we felt about it.
Now, remember, this is a preview, so what we're showing here is a prototype. So rules are subject to change, and so are all the different components, including some of the elements of the art.
Now, the first thing to communicate about this game is if you've played Distilled, the previous game by Paverson Games, this is much heavier.
Yeah.
In fact, this is one of the heavier games that we've played this year. And the reason for that is because of the element of timing and the order in which you need to achieve things that all centers around this worker placement idea.
Yeah. So yeah, with the worker placements, it's really interesting because it is this bidding style worker placements. You have these wooden chips, which are essentially your family members, and they all have a different skill level. And so as you're secretly placing them in different locations, obviously you're trying to, the higher the skill there, there's a mini competition there with other players in terms of then who's going to get to go first and have first dibs. But what I like about it is that there's also, no matter what order you go in all of the locations, if you go there with a 4 value or more, you're always going to get an additional bonus. So it's usually going up one of these tracks or another sort of benefit. And even if you come dead last and you're not, by the time you go to select something, there's not really the things that you wanted are gone. All of the locations also have a secondary type of action that you can do instead, which is really helpful because sometimes it's actually like collecting materials. So for example, the 3 types of materials, which we didn't really talk about, is animal. So this is the sort of the white cube. So animal type products that would go into the instruments, wood and metal. And so, if you go to the performance area, you can get 3 of your animal type material, which is quite good because otherwise, the other way of getting that would be to essentially forego a turn and go to the market and just buy and sell. But then you have to have the money for it. You may not. And that's the case with all the locations. So I really like that you never feel completely left out.
No, and the turn order thing is really quite interesting because you do place this down blind, but the person who goes there gets priority in terms of breaking ties.
Yes.
So if I was to go there next, I place that on top, and then at the point where it gets revealed, Maggie has a 5, I have a 5, but she went there first, so she gets to go first. So that's interesting. And there's another little element that along the way, you're going to be able to recruit these apprentices. And these apprentices, you have 3 each. So you either have them or they're here in the market ready to be collected. And you can add these to your blind bid. And then when it gets revealed, this would now be a 6. And so this 6 would beat Maggie's 5 that she placed down first because I've added this apprentice. So that's a nice way to mitigate against the luck of the blind bidding. But another thing that I really enjoy is that in order to go to the market to buy and sell resources, you have to forego one of your worker placement actions. But because everyone around the table is going to be choosing which location to activate and the order of it, if there's a really busy location, that's the best place to put your worker in if you need to go to the market first, because people are probably going to want to go and complete that. You didn't think of that, did you?
I've never thought of that. And I'm like going, is that true? I'm trying to go through all the different games. Has that been true?
Definitely true.
I guess, potentially.
Because you're trying to obviously manipulate or at least play into what you think everybody else's strategy is. So if you think someone needs to go somewhere first in their action order, well, then that's the place that I want to be putting a chip into in order to go to the market.
It's a whole other layer
I've given away
I had not
strategy.
I had not taken into consideration. But I think that's interesting. But even that, so because we haven't even talked about how the order of those actions gets resolved. So that's where it's not just obviously the order in terms of the strength of your workers that will determine your priority in each location, but the turn order will also then determine which player gets to decide what area of the board gets activated next. And so then that whole area will resolve. And we've had many games where that's been the thing that, particularly towards the final rounds, that messes someone's games. Like, no, because I needed to go there first.
I need to go there
I needed
first.
that
Yeah.
area to activate first
Yeah.
before that. So that adds another layer
It does.
of interest.
And
yeah.
that's why the balcony is so important. So the balcony is important for two reasons. Let me use this baton to show you. There are these public objectives up here, and they're going to be variable from game to game.
Yes.
Which is great because there's always something new to aim for. And also only one person can take each of these spots. This is so handy for pointing, if nothing else.
There you go. It has no other in-game purpose. So
maybe that's why we've included it, just so the reviewers can point things out. But if you go to the balcony, you also get to change the turn order as well. And the balcony can be really useful for getting these apprentices and some money along the way. But the other thing that's really handy that they have included to enhance the gameplay is this string instrument neck that we have here. And the reason why this is important, particularly as you get to a 3 or 4 player game, when you are revealing the workers, it gets you want to make sure that you're capturing the order in which people are going to play. So maybe Maggie went there with a 5 and I went there with a 3 and then Maggie went there with a 3 after me, and then I went there with a 1. So the person who is choosing which area to activate, we give them this board and they show how it's all falling out in terms of turn order. And then we play through these one by one. And then we, once we've done that, these go back to the players and then we pass this to the next player in turn order, because everyone is going to be taking turns at different points of the game. It helps to keep track of turn order, and without it, it would be actually quite a mess. So I'm glad that they've included that, because it can, even with this, it can get a little bit confusing about whose turn it is. So we always make sure that we strictly pass that for turn order. Just 2 other things on the worker placement. One is that as we move through the rounds of the game, which is tracked up here, we are going to be unlocking a new worker between stages 2 and 3, and also between 4 and 5. So you start with your 1, 3, and 5 worker, and then you're also going to get a 2 and a 4 along the way. And you also have these 3 other workers that have these unique symbols on the back. These come into play once you reach this point on each of these tracks, which you'll be able to move up in different ways. But when you've activated that, you get to go through a deck of cards that relates to these specialized workers. And essentially, once you've chosen an ability that you like, so for example, this when I perform gives me 2 re-rolls of the dice, you are going to be able to lock up the worker that you went to that spot with and replace it with this specialized worker that you will now use instead, that has this special power. So when I go and perform with this worker, it's allowing me to re-roll the dice. And while we're on the topic, let's talk about the dice, because, you know, people, some of the gamers, they don't love a lot of luck in
Including
games.
myself, I'm not a big like leave it to chance sort of thing. It's like I want to know, I want to have control of my steps and my turns.
But there is a dice rolling element in this game. When you go and perform, you're going to select one of the cards that's on show. I should also note that we're showing the 2-player side of the board, and this is a 2-player setup that has a 3rd neutral color that's blocking a lot of spots. But anyway, when we go and perform, we're going to get one of these performance cards, and it has these different levels of performance ability, shall we say, or skill. And you're going to start the game with 2 of these white die that just have values of 1, 2, and 3, and the pips are represented by the little musical notes, which is very cute. But as you move up this track, in particular this performance track, you're going to unlock re-rolls and these more powerful black dice as well. So there are ways that you can mitigate against this. Plus, there's another resource in this game called inspiration. So these are the inspiration tokens, and you can use these in many different ways in the game. You can use it to influence your final total of your performance roll. You can use it to discount costs along the way. So these are useful to have on hand, as well as currency, which is also very important in this game.
So now let's talk about the orchestra, which is where the area majority game takes place. So this is all about having a more powerful type of token coming into play. The most powerful is always the instrument. So if I'm able to create create an instrument and place it somewhere, they're going to be able to either obviously just claim whatever chair straight away, or they can bump any of these other areas where there's just these lesser tokens, which represent just having repaired an instrument that has ended up there, or having done a performance that has ended up there. So in the event that I were to create this instrument and say it's a string instrument, so I can actually place it anywhere on this row. I would be able to then, so if I wanted to go here, I would be able to bump that one, and which means that they still would get to have that location there. They just don't have the most important chair in that location, and I get the bonus that is listed there. If I were to instead, if it wasn't one of those instruments, if I were to have done a performance, for example, and go somewhere where there's either another performance token or a repair token, they don't actually, because they're kind of equals, the first one that's there is going to get priority, so you don't actually get to bump it. You get to still go there, you get to still play, but you don't get that bonus. You get a consolation bonus of just like money and inspiration.
Yeah. And you are a little bit restricted in where you can place things. The rows relate to different types of instruments that you're creating, and then these sections relate to different styles of music that you'll be performing. So you have to follow the rules when placing. And then at the end of the game, you are going to get victory points according to the number of chairs that you occupy. And that's a scale of victory points. But it could also be important because you might have private objectives. For example, here I have private objectives that relate to repairing or creating string instruments. So at the end of the game, if I've been able to complete 3 of that type, I'm going to get, the most victory points I can. So that could give me focus in this row here. Likewise, when you go to the balcony and you're competing for these variable public objectives, you can see this one here is relating to having chairs of different types for different types of instruments. So depending on what objectives are in play, that's going to dictate what you're trying to do here. There's also 3 special chairs which can only be taken when you are able to complete a more prestigious type instrument.
Yeah, I should also say you can actually, this is where there's another little mini majority within it. If I were to, on a subsequent turn or action, come here again with another one of my color tokens, and now I have majority of tokens, again, not counting these ones, because the instruments are always instruments, they're the most important, I would be able to take over that chair. So that's the other kind of element that could happen.
Yeah, and I really enjoy this minigame. I just wish that some of the rewards were a little more compelling, because then it would create more tension. And then the end game points are a little bit light because it is really hard, and sometimes you've got 7 or 8 chairs and it only equates to, maybe 10 points. And you're like, well, that was a lot of work throughout the game for only 10 points, but it can make the difference. So you do need to be contributing to this. And the only other point that I'll add, this is obviously a prototype, but it does get a little bit difficult to see the benefits that are here, especially when it gets crowded like this. And if you're on the other side of the board, it's really hard to see, really challenging to see. So I wish these were slightly bigger, given the importance that this has in terms of the core of the game.
I also want to talk about the artwork in this game, because it is quite beautiful. Like the Vincent Dutrait art is super inviting. I love the instruments. They're all very unique, and they're actually quite interesting in terms of what they've selected, and even just the type of, the way that they've been illustrated is quite nice.
Yeah, if you enjoy music or instruments, like obviously that's the focus of this game, and they've done a beautiful job of bringing that to life.
Yeah. And overall, just the board, it really does make you feel like you're in like 18th century Vienna, is what the sort of sense that I get. And even with the patrons and things like that, it's really gorgeous. The one thing that I would like to see more of is more diversity in terms of the types of people who are represented, particularly in the families. Again, this is a prototype at this stage, and a lot of the areas actually say just placeholder art in the meantime. So yeah.
And now that's going to bring me to my biggest gripe of this game. And, this is a prototype, and I will preface this with the fact that when Distilled came out and we covered the preview, there were a couple of things that we pointed out that were actually changed in the final edition. And so I know that Paverson Games is going to be very open to this feedback. But one thing that gets in the way in this game is some of the iconography, not the icons themselves, but the way that they're implemented throughout the game. And now bear in mind, this is quite a heavy game. And one element, there's minor things which we won't talk about here, but we will pass on to the publisher. But one of the main things that we found particularly confusing was just the use of iconography on the sponsors. And if you think about the main element in this game, you really want to be achieving those goals on the sponsors, and it created a level of confusion with all of our friends. And even after playing
Multiple
5,
games,
6, 7 games, we were still getting confused about what we had to do. So the iconography, we feel, still needs a little bit of work just to help people with the complexity of this game to be able to get into it, because on each of these cards there are different objectives that relate to what these sponsors want. So they definitely always want an instrument to be crafted. And so, for example, this mech sponsor, you can see that there are 3 different conditions that mech wants met in order to complete the sponsor card. The first one is to craft an instrument, but then the next one relates to either repairing or performing. And it all looks like it relates to this guitar, but it doesn't. Actually, only the repair relates to this guitar, and the performance relates to this style of music that they like. And just having these icons in completely separate places is a little bit confusing. There's some other things that come into play with turning the cards over, and they relate to the wrong side of the card. So there's a few things here that are tripping us up. We'll be sure to pass that feedback on to the publisher, and I have no doubt that they'll be able to fix those issues that we had. And that would just really to help make the gameplay a lot smoother.
Reduce the cognitive load while you're already keeping so many bits of information in your mind with just the gameplay.
But speaking of sponsors, I do want to say that's one of my favorite elements of this game, because there's this really interesting dynamic where the sponsors start to get impatient with you. So you can see that at the bottom of the card there is a number of bonuses, and each round you're going to be able to move this patient cube, and you're going to gain a bonus for moving it. But the problem is, the more impatient they get, the closer they get to just leaving, going away before you've had a chance to complete them. Now, if the sponsor has multiple objectives, every time you achieve one, it's going to reset that counter to give you a bit more time, which is fantastic. And so you're really thinking about, from round to round, I need to give my sponsors at least one of the conditions that they want, otherwise they're going to go away. And it is not cheap if they go away. When they go away, you are going to lose 3 victory points for each condition that you haven't met.
For each requirement that they had on them.
Exactly. And so this is just a really fun thing that brings a lot of tension.
I feel like that's what creates the most thematic discussions around the table, because you're like, oh no, this one's going to be really unhappy with me. I need to give them something, which is like that whole thing of like having patrons that are giving you gifts and kind of supporting you. And if you're not paying your dues, then it's going to cost you. And it's going to cost you in the form of prestige, which is the whole aim of the game.
And this is one of one of my most favorite elements of this game is actually the setup, because at the beginning you get so many good choices. The first thing is you get 2 random families, and the families are going to have a one-off benefit that's going to give you something at the start of the game that creates asymmetry, but also they're asymmetric in terms of the starting resources that you're going to gain. So at the beginning you're choosing between 2 families and you get to lock that in, but then you're also choosing between 2 starting instruments, 2 starting sponsors, and 4 private objectives. So you're looking at all these goodies and you're thinking about where's the best synergy to give me the best start in this game. I really like that pick and mix style asymmetry.
At the same time, it does make it quite overwhelming if you're not a non-gamer, or if you're brand new to it because you have no idea, if you haven't really played it before. It's like, I don't even know what I'm trying to do. I don't know how these things are going to work together. But the more games that you have under your belt, then it's like, oh, okay, I can see this is going to work really well. And it does then give you a direction of what you might want to do for your focus in terms of the game.
And now let's talk about player count, because we've played this game at every player count, and we've played it a lot at every player count. And so we have some thoughts and opinions here. This game is blind bidding. And if that didn't trigger you to think that this is probably better at a higher player count, well, it is better at a higher player count, because you get more interactivity with other people. There's more vying for priority order. And of course there are scaling options. So the other side of the board is for 3 or 4 players. But there's other things going on here, because in a 2-player game, you have 2 choices. You can either play it with just some neutral blocking pieces and then go about your business how you would play it with more players. Or you can introduce the automa, that is the solo automa.
So the way that the solo automa works is that all the other sides of the board have the option for being an automa board. And so with that board, essentially, it's got one main deck of cards that essentially you would obviously sort of shuffle. They start with a level 1, and they're going to be dictating. So if you shuffle them, you when it's the turn of the automa, you would reveal one, and then that's going to dictate where their chip and the chips that they have. So their workers are going to be randomized into a stack face down, and that chip goes face down into a particular area, which will then obviously, once it goes to trigger, it's going to obviously mess up with that area. It's going to take some of the stuff in there that you might have wanted, which will also like help reset the market and refresh the market and things like that. But interestingly, what happens is for different, depending on, as you kind of laid them all out, depending on the type of chip that ended up taking that particular role, they will upgrade. So that's how the automa upgrades or skills up their chips. And so that then levels up to their level 2 of that particular action. So I found that, interestingly, it's got some interesting concepts in the way that it sort of plays out, because it also has its own sort of priority tracks, and depending on what actions got played, it'll move that priority track forward or back. But it was just, for a game that's so cognitively heavy, there was too much of automa facilitation, which I know for people that like to feel like they're competing against an opponent, that's great, because then it helps recreate that. But for me, I prefer automas that just stay out of the way, that I'm not having to, like, okay, let me now stop and take their turn and what's their preference. And again, they also then have priorities of, okay, if they go here, they're going to want to match with their particular patron and their particular, instrument. So that just added a little bit too much for me. So this is not a game that I would play solo, because of just my personal preference of how I like to engage in solo play with automas. But for players who like to replicate that competitive thing, then it'd be one to try.
Yeah, and for 2 players, definitely we're playing without the facilitation of the automa. And all it does is it reduces the, often we end up going to different spots around the board where each other are not even there. And so it does end up with us playing a little bit more simultaneously, because we're not affecting each other. And also, it just reduces the level of interactivity. So this game, for me, my preference is 3 or 4 players. Probably the sweet spot is 3 players, because I this can get a lot when there's 4 players, and so it's kind of like enough interaction, but also allowing you to get things done that you want to get done. So that is it for our preview. This has been a really long video, but there's plenty to talk about here. So, just because we've spent so long in this video, you'll see that this is a really complex game. It has a lot of layers to it. It took us quite a few games to kind of work out the strategy of this. And no doubt people who love heavy games are probably going to really enjoy this one. So we'll post all the links below to the campaign so you can follow along. Not sure of dates yet, but we'll pop them in the description. We hope you enjoyed this preview. If you did, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.